You're listening to Season 2 of Conversations with Kathy, the podcast for women who are looking for a place filled with honest conversations, tangible takeaways, and new perspectives on life, love, and everything in between. And I'm your host, Kathy Ann Roach. Let's jump right in. Can you love more than one person at a time? And I'm not talking about your brother, your sister, your friends. I'm talking about your intimate partner. I know many have varying views on this, but this is why I reached out to Lena. Lena helps people have difficult conversations. You know, the ones you might be too afraid to have with your coworkers, your family, or even your partner. I was extremely excited to talk to Lena about a conversation that some of you might find difficult, and that's about being polyamorous in a seemingly monogamous world. Lena Lang is a coach who is dedicated to bringing the world together one transformational conversation at a time. So let's jump right into my conversation with Lena. So Lena, thank you so very much for taking the opportunity to chat with me. I know that it's late on your end. It was a little challenge for us to put this time together because you are exactly where?
I'm in Danang, Vietnam.
Why?
Why? Good question. First off, thank you so much for having me. And it's no trouble at all because I am a notorious night owl. I love just working at night and just enjoying the sunshine during the day and working at night. And so no problem there at all. Why am I in Danang? So I am actually a digital nomad, which means I work online. And back when travel was a thing, I was going to different countries and living there for periods of time and then kind of moving periodically and kind of having a nomadic lifestyle. So last February, I ended up here and was only supposed to be here for a month. But of course, now that's turned into a year and a bit and counting.
Yeah, that's interesting because we have like an 11-hour time difference between us. So I find all of that quite fascinating. So as we discussed prior to coming on camera, we are here to talk about polyamorous relationships and polygamy. And I had to do a little research, like I told you, so I'm going to give the audience a chance to understand a little bit what it is, because most of the people who are listening on my end would be very familiar with the standard type of relationships, monogamy, with one partner, two people deciding to be, exclusive to each other and having that type of relationship. Now, I had to realize today that there was a difference between being polyamorous and polygamy and the difference between poly relationships and open relationships, right? So I went like, okay, I didn't know. And then there was a whole list of other types of relationships that I decided was too much for me to absorb in this very moment.
The terminology is overwhelming. Yeah. Sure.
Yes. So in your terms, how would you describe what is a polyamorous relationship?
Yeah. So in a standard monogamous relationship, like you said, there would be an expectation of like a lot of sexual exclusivity and like a great deal of like exclusivity in terms of emotional intimacy. That would be done with your primary partner, romantic partner. Now, with polyamorous relationships, those expectations are very custom made, let's say. So there is an opportunity usually to be sexual with people outside of your primary relationship, or even to cultivate multiple sexual relationships, all of which is done above the table. So it's not like it's, being dishonest or cheating or anything like that. A lot of people get those two things confused. So this is done with a lot of transparency. And there's no one size fits all. So like you said, in your research, there's all sorts of configurations that people have come up with. And really that's there in order to meet their unique needs of the individuals involved. So rather than default to a standard model, people take inventory of what it is that they're needing, what it is that they're hoping to create in terms of their lifestyle overall, what works for them. And they create relationships with people who are compatible with those kinds of boundaries. And, they're very much like snowflakes. No two poly relationships are exactly alike because their boundaries and their borders and their mechanics depend on the people that are involved.
Because usually this, let's say group, for lack of a better word, of people all agree. It's not open, whereas I can have multiple partners, and I'll just tell you about it. Is it in poly, the group of people come together and say it's the three of us, so it's the four of us, and we're in a polyamorous relationship, as opposed to two partners who then have an open relationship with random people in terms of whoever they meet? It is poly an arrangement between a group of people who all know
So
each
it
other?
can be. It certainly can be. I mean, I don't really, for me, I don't personally make a really strict distinction between open relationships and poly relationships,
Okay.
just because, in my experience, it's not a clear distinction. Like sometimes a couple will start, there's this couple centric polyamory. It's very
Right.
trendy right now. There's even, did you
Yes.
know there was Tinder for threesomes? There is.
Okay.
It's called, I don't remember what it's called, but there is. So
Okay.
this is very much in the sort of in the public kind of zeitgeist now. It's more, it's out of the closet now.
Right.
It used to be that people would swing and have these hush hush like key parties.
Mhm.
Now it's like, okay, we're a couple, but we're like an adventurous couple.
Yeah.
So that's kind of like what's thought of as an open relationship. But in my experience, you know, those kind of open arrangements tend to morph into some degree of polyamory, or some, maybe they go in and out of polyamory. Maybe they might do that for a period of time and then decide that's not for them. And maybe that might reemerge in a different way. So these things are very much intertwined.
Right.
As far as poly arrangements, yeah, they can be. Like if you have, for example, three people who have this polycule where, you know, it's like polyfidelity circle where they're like, okay, we're going to date just the three of us, and that's it. But we're not going to be open to anybody else. Then there's people who are like, for example, anarchic. They practice relationship anarchy, where anything goes at any point, and no strict arrangements are decided upon beforehand. And rather people do that, you know, as the situation arises. So it can look in a variety of different ways for different people. But the point I want to make is that it's usually quite organic.
Right.
So slapping any kind of label onto it, that's good for, you know, about 5 minutes. And then, you know, human emotions overtake it.
So what happened?
Yeah,
what happened with you in terms of you deciding? I don't know if it was a decision or whether it's something that just flowed. How did you get involved in a polyamorous relationship?
Well, I'm just one of those people where I'm just a questioner of everything. I always have been. You know, whenever people tell me like, no, we do it this way, I'm always like, do we? Is that the way we should be doing it? Is that optimal? Like, let's A/B test this like model. Right. You know, like I'm just that kind of person where I'm a questioner of things. I think because I'm like a child of immigrant parents, I'm an immigrant myself, I've always been exposed to like multiple different ways of living life. And I think maybe that set me up for it, just being open-minded to different lifestyles and different points of view, different perspectives. And I think I also sort of had this like lust for adventure and meeting new people and meeting alternative people, like-minded people who think in ways that question the status quo, as well as just like real lust, like having a high sex drive and like being in my early 20s, being like, yeah, I'm totally poly. And of course, screwing it up totally before really like, you know, studying up about it and reading about the ethics of it and trying to arrange it in a more conscious way. Right. So it's very much a perfect storm of different factors, both like individual and life circumstance, you know, things like that.
So is it that you would have met somebody, because we think usually in our typical relationship, boy meets girl, and okay, we have this conversation and we know we're exclusive. Do you want to be my boyfriend, girlfriend, whatever it is? In poly, is that a discussion at the start, or is it that it evolves into, well, I want to be with other people? How did that work for you?
It's different for different people. For me, it was, like I said, I was really curious. Like in my early 20s, I was, dating different people, and I didn't, I just found myself kind of thinking like, well, this part of me is alive with this person, and then this other part of me is alive when I'm with this person. And understanding also like having high social appetite as well. I can see how different parts of me are alive when I'm with different people. Like think about it this way, like when you have that friend who you love having deep intellectual discussions with, and you watch brainy documentaries and you have these debates, and you're like, yeah, that's my like friend that I come to experience that intellectual depth side. If I have a controversial issue, I want to think out, that's who I go to.
Yes.
And then you have your friend who like, you discuss celebrity gossip and you go shopping together, and it's no less important. It's just still a part of yourself. It's an important part of your social ecosystem.
Yes.
But if you were to only be around that intellectual friend, you would get a little lopsided, because that part of yourself, that brainy part, would sort of take over, and you would over-identify with that at the expense of all of these different parts of yourself. Right. So I kind of noticed that when I was interacting with people. And I also noticed that, like conventional relationships were predicated upon, in my view, an unhealthy degree of fear and possessiveness and just, anxiety about that person meeting your needs in a very particular way and on an ongoing basis. And it's sort of like we want to put it on autopilot. Like, yes, this is how it's going to go. And it's going to be like this. And you're always going to meet this need in this way. And good, set it and forget it. And, like I noticed that my life was never like that. I never had a set it and forget it life. I always wanted one. To be honest, but life just decided, you know what, like, we're just going to like have transformation be the theme,
Yes, yeah.
And so I was one of those people. And so I like being somebody who's quite reflective. Like I started reflecting on these different things, and I started reading up about it. Like when I got kind of serious about it, that's when I started reading books about it. And that's when I started seeking out relationships that had the potential to be poly.
Right.
So I started bringing it up early.
So you kind of identified through your process what you needed was not necessarily a traditional type of relationship.
I didn't know what I needed to be. When I started, I just wanted to try it out and see what would happen and see how I would do in it and see what I could create with that. And I wanted to test it out. And because I read about it, first I was, doing the psychology nerd thing. First I read, I saw that it was possible. I saw that it was possible and to do it ethically, which is a contrast to how I first started doing it, which I think a lot of people can identify with. But I started to, when early on in the dating process, I started, talking to people about it and seeing, what their reactions were and seeing, what they're trying to create and how open they were to it. And so there were relationships where that was not on the table and, or maybe it was in talks and it didn't quite flourish. And then I got into like a relationship with someone where we like almost said it at the same time. I was like, oh, I'm curious about this and I want to do that. He's like, perfect. It's exactly what I want to do. Let's do that.
Yes.
And so we ended up being together for 4 years. And that was sort of the bulk of my really poly lifestyle at that point.
Now, the question that would come to mind for some people is love and sex. So some people may ask, is this something that's simply because it's a sexual thing that you want to have sex with multiple people? And another person might say, do you love these different people? Can you love more than one person at the same time? So what would you say to someone who's a bit confused about, is there love in this? Is this only about sex? What would you say?
Well, just like any other relationship that you would have, some people are in relationships just for sex and they're monogamous. And there's some people who are in relationships because they love those people, but maybe they're not sexual and like anything in between. So just like that, people have a variety of different reasons of why they pursue it. What I've noticed is, and I want to really come back to that question of, is it possible to love more than one person? Because that is a gem. But first I want to just say that like, I have noticed that a lot of people come into the poly camp because they have real relational trauma and they couldn't hack it in a one-on-one relationship because they don't have the emotional maturity and they don't have the like coping mechanisms and they're not aware of their triggers and they blame that all on the context of the monogamy. Monogamy is so constricting. I can't possibly make this work. Polyamory is the answer. So I'll just do that.
Yeah.
and so, yay, I discovered this thing that now my relational trauma is non-existent. Well, it's going to show up the same way. Yeah. Surprise, it's still there. You know, like wherever you go, there you are. So yeah, a lot of people, I would say, do it for the wrong reasons because they're not addressing something in their relationships. There's some people who do it because like they don't have their sexual needs met by their primary partner. Maybe they are bisexual, for example, or maybe they have some kind of a kink that they want to find a playmate for that kink. And so the nature of their other relationships is to fulfill that particular need. Other people, you know, my ex-boyfriend and I, he loved adventure. He loved like jumping off of waterfalls and, you know, like anything high speed, like he was an adrenaline junkie. I am like a homebody. Like I love curling up with a good book and I'm a foodie and I'm just like, put some cheese on it, melt it in the microwave and just eat it. You know, like that's more my speed. Yeah. So for us, it was also like having different interests as well. And yeah, different people have different, appetites for different things. But I think the common thread among everyone is that they get to experience a different side of themselves through these other connections. And the depth varies. Some people are in incredibly loving polyamorous relationships that really are very committed and very deep and very intense. Other people use it as a way to keep people at a distance, and they sort of like dabble and they sort of play with this idea. So everyone's level of relationship depends on their own level of development and what they're ready for. So there's, again, no size fits all, but this whole idea of can you love more than one person? I think that when you reflect on the amount of people that you love in your life, you will notice that there's a wide array of people that you love for very different reasons. There's your parents, there's your, siblings, there's your lover, there's your, perhaps even your past lover. Some people, I will say to the end of my life, if I told you I love you, I still love you. Yes. That's good for one lifetime. Take that token, do what you will with it. I still love them. I don't want to be with them, but I still love them. And I love them in very different ways than I do, say, my platonic friends. And love is something that's not limited to people that you bump genitals with. I mean, I think that's very reductive. And unfortunately in society, we think we're just like love and sex. No, those two go together. And then everyone else is like a downgrade. If we're not having sex, then powerful. I kind of, and it's like, oh, well, we're not having sex, so I don't love you as much. Yes. I don't care that you're my mom, but I don't love you. That is really powerful, I think, because last night I was having a discussion with some people and one of the guys in the group kept asking me, so what is love? What is love? And every time we talked about something, he popped in, he's like, that's not love. So this is very interesting because you're correct. It was all tied to love and sex because we were having a discussion about whether infidelity is a deal breaker. And there were people who were very adamant of, if I'm cheated on, I'm out, I'm gone. Infidelity is a deal breaker. And I said, it's based on so many other factors that you're not even considering here right now. So when you said the word trauma, in terms of how we develop our thought pattern, really about how we view our relationships with other people, I found that very, very interesting. Would you be willing to elaborate on that a little bit in terms of what you think about stuff like that? Yeah, relational trauma all day long. It's like my favorite subject ever. Yeah, so every one of us experiences relational trauma at some point in our lives. And I think when we hear the word trauma, we think like, okay, you were in a war zone or you were, horribly neglected or abused. And actually, trauma is just anything that made an impact on you that has left this resonance that, is kind of leaving like knots in your soul that are begging to be untied in some way, usually through some kind of consciousness. You need to shed consciousness on it in order to untie it. So relational trauma usually is formed through like the first people that you ever loved, your parents, your caregivers, your community. But not to say you can't incur relational trauma later on, people often do, but it's some kind of a setup where your need isn't being met for some reason. And you have to compensate for that need not being met. And then you develop sort of these coping strategies. Then you identify with the coping strategies. And then you say like, well, that's my identity. I'm just the kind of person for whom like, cheating is just, a deal breaker and I will not stand for that. I'm that honest. And you identify with this way of being like, I am this and I'm not that. And then there's this like crust on you of like shoulds and should nots. And then relationships become this sort of bargaining of, trying to fit somebody into your crust.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, it's also very bolstered by societal narratives about what's okay and what's not okay. And that's colored by religious understandings and all that kind of stuff, which all in concert, help us to live into our relational traumas. Like they don't really encourage us to look at them and say, gosh, why do I feel that way? Is there a situation where, cheating is permissible or even in the service of the relationship? Wow. Is that even something that I'm willing to think about consciously, consider? Yeah.
Yeah. And I think in a lot of cases, people say they're not. And personally, I think that's very closed, a very closed way of thinking, because so many different things can happen, why infidelity might step in. And then you may be in a particular space where you have to consider a lot more things than just your ego and your hurt feelings. You may have to consider your kids, the investment you've made in your relationship, and all of these sorts of things. So it's not really a cut and dry that says this happens, then my response is going to be like that. So I agree with you in terms of saying there are things that people have to consider that they don't even want to consider. Because some of the things that you've said would be a lot of people are just going to be like, well, not me. I don't even want to hear that, because they cannot comprehend the fact that maybe we as human beings are not monogamous by nature. Or maybe the reason I feel this way about monogamy, it's because of society or because of this conditioning or because of this thing. They don't even want to consider it. So everything outside of what they believe is now taboo. So the question about where somebody might say you're polyamorous because you don't want to commit. Because you mentioned that a little bit in the top, that some people come into it because they go like, well, I don't want to commit to anybody. And I just want this lifestyle where I'm floating around between people and everybody knows about it. Again, I guess you said some people, that's their reasoning, whereas others, you still end up having a certain level of commitment and even in those relationships. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, for sure. Like there are, and the other point I wanted to make also with infidelity that a lot of people don't consider, I'll come back to the other question, but I really wanted to make the point that when we think about infidelity, we tend to only think about like physically having sex with someone else, like that's the deal breaker. But we don't think about infidelity, like, for example, financial infidelity, where someone has a gambling problem and they've put the relationship in jeopardy due to that. Or we don't think about infidelity when someone has mentally checked out, where they're not emotionally available, they're not emotionally connected, they're not attuned to the other person's needs, sometimes for years. They might not be physically cheating. They might not even be looking at porn. But can we say that that person is in that relationship with full integrity? Well, people who are like really adamant that cheating is bad would only define it in this narrow sense. Whereas I think that there are multiple different ways to cheat without even, getting on Tinder and prowling Craigslist or whatever it is that people do. So that's one thing I wanted to say. But with regards to people who use polyamory as an escape hatch from really facing their demons and their relational traumas, I think it's a real thing. Like it's a real thing. I've encountered it myself because, the point that I made that we get to experience different sides of ourselves through other people. Well, there's a way that you can start to objectify other people through that. Like, I had this friend who was like very adamantly poly, and he would describe it as like, well, with Sarah, I get to, experience my creative side and she gives me this. And, with Amy, I get to experience this. And with so-and-so, I get to experience that. And, here I'm getting all these things and not really considering what you're giving and like what you're creating together. So it can become this sort of add to cart, this sort of like endless hunger for novelty can be fed in the guise of, I'm just going my own way. I'm doing it a different way. I'm this iconoclast. I'm this modern free thinking person. It can be a really convenient escape hatch to avoid looking at what it is that you're kind of not accepting into your life,
right,
or what you're keeping at bay, and why. Because it was the result of many years of that, was that this person ended up being quite lonely and bereft, and had this period of being in sort of this wilderness of being like, oh my gosh, like, I've been living this lifestyle, and there's been a lot of things that are unconscious in it. And actually what I really want is this deep connection, but I just don't know how to go about it. And then eventually did the inner work, and luckily the story has a happy ending, ended up being with a really loving and wonderful partner that he's aligned with.
Now, I was going to ask that because two things you said I was going to come back to. The people who are in camp monogamy are going to say, well, just like you just said there, he tried this polygamy thing and he ended up right back needing connection with one person. That's the only real connection as humans, because that's where we end up needing to find this one person who, for some reason, can meet these particular needs, if not all, but we end up back looking for quote unquote our person. I don't necessarily believe in the our person, one person for me, but it's what people think, well, I found my person. Is it that that is, and that really ends up in terms of what really happens in the end, that what people are looking for is their person?
No, they're not going to like my next story, which is of like this couple who like had kids and was polyamorous the whole time, and like has a nuclear family, and they each have their lovers, their respective lovers, who are also really important to them for years, for as long as I've known them. So not at all. I don't think so. I think in the case of my friend, because he was doing it so unconsciously, and he wasn't even taking stock of like, hey, like, what do I actually want in relationships? Like, what is it that I fear? What is it? He wasn't asking these questions. He was just jumping on the bandwagon. And he was, living life in a way that was like, I guess, like socially lauded for the fact that he is a guy. And so he wasn't doing it consciously. And then there's these other people that were doing it consciously and have found a great deal of success in polyamory, a great deal of stability in polyamory as well. So not at all. I don't think that it's inevitable that we'll come back to that one-on-one relationship at all. I think the key ingredient is consciousness, is like conscious decision-making, and not capitulating to what is easy, what's available, what's socially acceptable. Because there's there's a trend that like, okay, in most communities, polyamory is not acceptable, but then there are these alternative communities where like the default is polyamory.
Right.
And then it's like the iconoclastic thing to do is to be monogamous. So it's like, there is this subculture of people for whom it's like the opposite. And so
is it that we're just confused? Is it that we're just totally confused, but going against either what society says to us versus what we mentally might think we want to do? So we have to either hide out in all of these little pockets of realities just to figure it out, because it can work. Like you said, it can work for some people. It can work for other people. It just seems like we said at the start, there's so many variations of this. Because even when I said I don't believe there is a person, one person, I was talking in terms of the things that you said before about there are some people who you can have deep conversations with. There are some people you can laugh with. There are some people that you can just hang out with. And it doesn't mean that you can find all of these qualities in one partner. But what people are also going to say, Lena, is, well, I don't want to have sex with all of these other people. So even though you tell me that I'm connecting love with sex, and I'm thinking about, I have lots of friends that I want to hang out with, but it does not, this friend moves me on an intellectual level and this person moves me. It doesn't mean I want to have sex with all of them, Lena. Sure. But polyamory is about having sex with these people. So tell me, how is it that I'm not connecting love with sex? That could be what somebody is listening is thinking.
First of all, I put a wrench into that assumption that polyamory is about having sex with these people.
Right.
That's not at all. I mean, there are people who have like really, first of all, there are people who are asexual. So I want to acknowledge them. There are people who don't engage sexually with their partners at all, but who have romantic connections, or maybe who have like kink-based connections, that it's like maybe their kink is like tickling you with a feather while you're handcuffed to a fire hydrant. Like, I don't know. What about people who are monogamous, but who are not sexual with their partner? There are many people who are in companionate relationships that describe those connections as being very valid and very real. And we don't go around checking to see how often somebody had sex in a marriage to say, well, that's not valid, right? Yeah. So there are many, it's not at all a prerequisite that you must be having sex for it to be polyamorous.
I think that was important for me to clear up, because when we think about relationships outside of our primary relationships, it's all about whether this person is having a sexual relationship with other people. So when people hear about polyamorous relationships, it is like, okay, there's 3 of you, there's 4 of you, there's like a bunch of you just having sex with each other. And that's not what I want in my life. So I just wanted to clear that up, that there can be a relationship with another person that is understood by your partner, that it's not sexual. Is it that there's always a primary couple, or is it that, you understand that I am polyamorous?
So this goes into the flavors of polyamory. There's definitely couple-based polyamory that, like I said, has gotten a lot of notoriety in recent years, where a couple would open up their relationship to some degree to incorporate other people, other partners, with varying degrees of emotional and physical intimacy and varying different boundaries around that. That's just one flavor. There are people who are like in polycules, who are like, okay, the 3 of us are going to be a throuple, and we're just going to be involved, just the 3 of us, and we're not open to other partners. So we're polyamorous, but just with each other. And there's people that have a bigger group of that. There's people who are just, they're in like kind of like a swinging community, where they're like, okay, well, we go to this one like venue or club, and we like hook up with people, and we like are acquaintances, like we hold this acquaintanceship, and like, maybe some of us have like more intimate relationships than others, but there's not really an expectation that we're going to be building our lives together and making joint decisions. There's other people who live in like communities where it's arranged around this kind of stuff. So it really is, it's a make your own adventure kind of thing. Like there are people who have blended like polyamorous families where they like raise each other's kids, and, maybe some of them are dating outside partners, some of them aren't. And, it's managing what's going on and what works for each individual person. But there's so many different flavors of that.
Does it get complicated in some cases where people start off thinking that this is something they want, only to realize that there's jealousy or there are issues between who's spending more time with who? Or does that also, I'm assuming that also occurs?
Yeah, that's like the most common question that I used to get when I would introduce myself as polyamorous. Like if people asked, obviously I wouldn't say, hi, I'm Lena, I'm polyamorous. No, but like people would ask about my partner, and then, I'd talk about my other partners. And that's the first question that they would ask. I'm very heartened that it was like it's like halfway during our interview. Like, what about jealousy? It just shows you how nuanced our discussion is. But I think the assumption that a lot of people make, which is unwarranted, about monogamous relationships is that they're jealousy free. That's the assumption a lot of people make, which is absolutely, as you know, not the case. That like, oh, now we've made a monogamous commitment and now jealousy will have no place in our relationship whatsoever. Said no to monogamous people ever. So I want to debunk that right away. So jealousy is something that everybody faces, no matter, what kind of configuration that they're in. And jealousy is really, like any emotion, an invitation to look at what's going on at a deeper level and to address that thing that's going on at a deeper level. And the same is true in monogamous relationships, and the same is true in polyamorous relationships. So just like in a monogamous relationships, you might feel some kind of way about your partner looking on Instagram at, Instagrammable butts and whatnot, You might feel some kind of way about your partner flirting with your server or whatever, or reconnecting with an ex. And that might bring things up for you. And the same thing would happen in a polyamorous relationship. I think where people get tripped up is they feel like in a poly relationship, they would have no right to voice that. That they would not have a justification for feeling that way. And that's the difference. And all the successful, polyamorous relationships that I've seen and participated in always have a voice for everyone's feelings. That absolutely needs to be on the table, because the only way it's going to work is if everyone's needs are being met. Right. So you have to take a lot of responsibility for recognizing which of your needs are not being met. And jealousy is a great helper in that. That'll, really direct your attention to where you need to look.
But one of your needs cannot be, I don't think you should be seeing him or her. Is that a need that you could express and say, well, we're poly, we're cool, but I don't think you should be seeing this person because I don't feel good about it. It makes me uncomfortable. It makes me jealous. Mm-hmm. How can that be expressed? Because that's the same thing you're saying, that usually in monogamy, people say, well, we're exclusive. I don't like this relationship that you're building, or I don't like the attention that you're showing to this person. Mm-hmm. And they can discuss that and decide, well, okay, I'm going to, stop liking her pics on Instagram or something like you said. But in a polyamorous, like you just said, how can you tell me that, or can you tell me that you think I'm spending too much time with the other person?
Well, I think just like in monogamous relationships, I would encourage this person to, first of all, take a look at what they're needing, what they're feeling. So you touched upon like, oh, I don't like the attention that you're giving this person. Mm-hmm. What that translates to me as, I'm feeling threatened that I'm not getting enough attention from you. Mm-hmm. It's actually very little to do with the other person, and very much to do with what is present in your relationship with your partner, the partner that you're dealing with. So again, it forces you to, instead of externalizing your feelings and trying to control what the other person does, to take ownership of what's happening within you and to say, gosh, this is triggering my sense of insecurity. I'm feeling vulnerable. I'm feeling threatened. I'm feeling a little bit like, uncertain about your level of commitment. When you spend this amount of time with this new person, I'm feeling a little bit insecure about whether or not, our relationship is going to continue. And I'm needing, more attention, and I'm needing more time, or I'm needing more of your presence. And is that something that you're open to, or has something shifted for you? I'm really needing some validation from you. Yeah. And that's really what it's about, because when you say like, I need you to not see that other person, you're again externalizing the problem. The problem is the other person. If you take away the other person, then everything will be fine. And that's usually not true, because your need is not being met in that context. And so I would encourage that person to look at, layers that are a little bit deeper than just the other person or the other Instagram account or whatever it is. Yes, that you're looking at. But yes, to answer your question, you absolutely have a voice to say these things. And in polyamorous relationships are only successful when you use that voice and when you have those tough conversations about you, about what's going on with you, and you negotiate with the other person, and you ascertain their willingness to meet those needs. And there will be times where they're not able to or willing to meet your needs, just like with any other partnership. Then you get to decide whether or not you want to stay in that relationship or not.
So where are you now in terms of your relationship headspace?
Where I am now, first of all, I haven't really been dating for the last couple of years. Been kind of taking a break because I've been traveling and I've been sort of working on myself. And frankly, I just haven't found somebody that I would like to date more longer term. But as far as like my ideal relationship, I think that I'm still on many levels open to polyamory, but I'm trying to get away from this idea of going for a particular type of relationship and more going for what kind of person do I want to be with, or what kind of dynamics do I want us to have? And then being open to what it develops to over time. So I don't want to, like in the past, go into relationships being like, now I want to be polyamorous and that's what we're going to build. But rather I want it to develop organically. I want to, be open to whatever life throws at me. And that's like a really tough thing, because like, I'm getting older. I'd also like to be married and have children. Yes. But I also know I don't want to calcify, and I don't want to be like, well, now I'm going to be this and not these other things, because who knows, maybe I meet someone and we fall so deeply in love. And then I meet another person that I really feel a strong love connection to. And I want to be alive to that. And I don't know, I just want to do what like God or the universe has planned for me, and to navigate that with grace and openness and flexibility. rather than go for, ticking a particular box and saying like,
Right.
oh, I want this kind of relationship with this sort of person, you know?
Yeah. As we close, what would you want the person listening to take away from all of this?
Well, just that you can make your relationships be a reflection of your inner needs and your inner truth and your inner desires, rather than defaulting to what society, what religion, what your family, what movies and TV shows tell you. That relationships are meant, for you to experience different parts of yourself. And that doesn't mean you have to have sex with everyone that you share a Netflix account with, but it does mean that you get to, if you want a fulfilling life, then look inside and scrutinize yourself and reflect on your true desires and your true needs, and put consciousness where there's conflicts and triggers, and really work through all that. Because on the other side of that are authentic relationships, which I feel are the base of a well-lived life. So without doing this kind of inner work, you're probably going to end up with like some cookie cutter version of what somebody else thought you should have.
Yeah. Yeah. Lena, thank you so much for taking the time to share your story with me. I really appreciate it.
I had a blast talking about this, and thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to Conversations with Kathy. If you like the show, be sure to subscribe, rate, and review. It helps others just like you to find the show. And if you want to connect with me, you can find me on Twitter and Instagram as Kathy Ann Roach, or in my Facebook group, Conversations with Kathy, where we connect live, discuss the episodes, and share tips for improving our lives. So until next time.